Episode 18 of the WildFed podcast, Past the Dramamine, Overcoming Barriers to Fishing with Conor Sullivan, is brought to you by Surthrival. Surthrival's Pine Pollen Pure Potency, we call it P4 in-house, is our exclusive original formula and our most advanced androgenic supplement. It harnesses the unrivaled potency of wild-crafted pine pollen extract, rich in testosterone and other androgenic compounds, along with the additional androgenic support of nettle rhizome, which frees testosterone in the blood, and eleuthero root, long known as Siberian ginseng and renowned for its ability to balance and upregulate hormone systems. This dynamic herbal extraction helps to naturally restore energy, balance hormones, lessen the signs of aging, increase endurance, spark libido, amplify performance gains, and fortify your immune system. All benefits of healthy testosterone levels. If you're hearing this before Wednesday, February 26th at midnight Eastern, you can head over to surthrival.com to take advantage of the unprecedented sale we're having on Pure Potency. With wholesale to the public pricing, now's a great time to stock up on your favorite herbal ally. Pine Pollen Pure Potency. Exceed your potential with targeted hormone balance for the modern man. And hey, if you're interested in learning more about pine pollen, especially since the foraging season is getting close, check out the book we carry at surthrival.com called Pine Pollen, Ancient Medicine for a Modern World by the renowned American herbalist Stephen Herod Buhner. He wrote the book exclusively for Surthrival, and I got the honor of writing the foreword. You can purchase a hard copy or a downloadable edition at surthrival.com. And for those of you that ordered Season 1 of the WildFed TV show, you received the season finale, Episode 8, yesterday. That episode's called Landlocked on the Hard Water, and it's one of my favorite episodes. It features an ice fishing trip for landlocked salmon, a winter chaga foraging trip, along with my favorite chaga recipe, and a piece about the largest plant Ivani and I forage each year. That's our winter solstice tree. This is a great episode, so be sure to check it out and the rest of the Season 2. If you aren't currently subscribed to the show, go over to wild-fed.com to purchase Season 1. All 8 episodes are available to watch now. Each are 30 minutes long, and the feedback we've gotten from our viewers has been incredible. To all of you who've watched Season 1, thank you for all your support. And if you're in the market for a new hat, check out both the green and hunter orange trucker hats over at wild-fed.com. I really took my time choosing great hat blanks for these, and I'm real happy with the way they turned out. The challenge I'm having now is that both our producer Grant and I both want to wear them, and it's kind of awkward because we show up for podcast interviews wearing the same hat. Hey Grant, I know you're listening. I think you and I need to work out a hat wearing schedule. Let people know that you're WildFed with the structured trucker hats at wild-fed.com. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Today's awesome interview is with Conor Sullivan. He's an outdoor writer, hunter, angler, and fisheries conservationist, and we're talking about breaking down the barriers to fishing. A Coast Guardsman, Conor's been stationed in the Northeast, Hawaii, and Alaska, and he brought his love of angling to each of these really different fisheries. His experience approaching the salt waters of these unique, and in the case of Hawaii and Alaska, really exotic fisheries, taught him a lot about starting over. That experience and hard-won knowledge translates really well into lessons for new and experienced anglers. There's a lot of useful information packed into this conversation, and just listening back to it got me really excited about the upcoming saltwater fishing season. Hey, speaking of saltwater fishing, last night Ivani and I were smelting in mid-coast Maine. By smelting, I mean catching saltwater rainbow smelt, a small anadromous species that can live in both salt or freshwater. The landlocked fish are really small, not much bigger than a French fry, and those fish are my favorite live bait for ice fishing landlocked salmon. But the saltwater fish grow much larger, between 6 and 12 inches, with females growing larger than males. In the winter, there's a tradition of renting small shacks, maybe 8 by 10 feet or so, on the river hardwater below the head of tide where we fish them through the ice. The shacks are equipped with small wood stoves and have a trough cut through the ice at the foot of both the left and right sidewalls. You spend a tide fishing for them as they move from saltwater into freshwater to feed. The whole thing's a really incredible ecological experience. We started last night at 8:30 p.m. and fished the 6 hours of the rising tide. What really amazes me is how the ocean tide not only stops the river in its tracks, but actually backs it up. So over the course of the 6 hours, the shack and the ice we were sitting on rose up about 8 feet. Then the whole thing reversed as a new crop of anglers showed up to fish the following tide. Last night we left there with about 30 smelt, which is a really modest harvest. We've had nights with no smelt at all, and we've had nights with 3 times that amount. But it's so much fun, and these fish are so delicious. They smell incredibly like watermelon, even after several days in the refrigerator. This time of year, the abdominal cavity of the males are swollen with milk packets, and the female are ripe with roe. They spawn in early spring. So when I clean them, I keep all of that and I use it to make fish cakes before cooking the smelt themselves. I even use the heads to make a fish stock, which I like for Asian-inspired dishes. Anyway, we're getting ready to wrap up the ice fishing season here. I put out 16 maple taps yesterday, and I have another 59 to get out in the coming week. Then it'll be turkey season and spring green foraging. Before we know it, the open water fishing season will be upon us again, and I can hardly wait. This interview gets me really eager to be back out on my boat, chasing meals as I slowly develop a better understanding of the fish and the fisheries around me. More than anything else, Conor Sullivan really inspires me to get to know my fisheries. And that's the thing I'm always emphasizing here on the show, getting to know your landscape, or in this case, watershed or seascape, and becoming a participant in the ecological processes where you live. Now, next week, I'll be talking with Dr. Laura Brandt. She's the regional scientist with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service based in South Florida and the lead wildlife biologist at the Arthur R. Marshall Loxahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. I sat down with Laura after harvesting my first alligator to learn more about the species, their ecology, habitat, and life history. But until then, let's get inspired to get on the water with Conor Sullivan. And for those of you who tend to get a bit seasick, now's a good time to pass around the Dramamine. All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm here with Grant Giuliano and Conor Sullivan. And we just met recently, had a phone call. You invited us up. Man, tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me down. This is awesome.
Well, you're having us, man. We're over at your place.
Yeah, welcome.
And you cooked us axis deer from Hawaii, which was, I've been hearing about it. It's like that hunt's getting out there because
it is.
Who's been doing, like Rogan's been doing that hunt, and some of that associated, the people around the On It crew. Kyle recently was saying that he'd gone out for one of those hunts. So I've been hearing about axis deer constantly and been like, what's the hype all about?
Sure.
Why does everyone keep saying this? And when we spoke on the phone, I was like, does it really taste any different? But man, what a exquisitely mild flavor.
Oh, it's a beautiful animal and obviously tastes phenomenal.
Yeah, and you got these hides, huh? Those are both axis deer?
Yep, those are both axis
Because
deer.
I walked in and my first, like, out of the corner of my eye, I was like, who tans like a fawn, because I saw those spots, and then I looked and realized, okay, that's not a fawn. Yeah, those are beautiful, by the way.
Yeah, they're just a cool animal.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how who are you? How do we end up being here?
Sure. Yeah, Conor Sullivan. Grew up. I think my first memory was fishing, probably off the dock in South Carolina, catching crabs and croakers with my dad. My dad was a Coast Guard officer, actually retired as an admiral. My mom was.
Your dad retired as an admiral
in the Coast Guard. Yeah.
Wow. No kidding.
We moved around a lot growing up. So I got to obviously Coast Guard. You're always on the coast. So I'm always seeing whether it's Hawaii or New England, California. When I was older, you start seeing different regions, but we're always fishing. He was a big fisherman.
You guys moved around, is what you're saying?
Yeah, 2 to 3 years and move around. So you kind of get a taste test of each region, and you start.
But always coastal.
Always coastal. Yeah.
There's no like Midwest.
Well, we went to Ohio actually. So I graduated high school in Ohio.
Because of the lakes.
Great Lakes, yeah.
And the Coast Guard then patrols that. Well, because that's also border for us with Canada.
Border, and obviously there's, it's a big body of water. It's those lakes are huge.
Right.
So yeah, you start fishing steelhead and perch and walleye. My mom's a professional writer, so I kind of end up, that kind of formed me.
You're sort of an amalgamation of
exactly.
the two then. Before we talk about writing, you're active duty in the Coast Guard?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. Are you able to sort of just, for people who are like familiar with Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, the Coast Guard is a branch of the military, but it's sort of in its own, sort of like occupies this little peripheral thing in a lot of people's minds. Like, what is the mission of the Coast Guard and what do they do?
Yeah, good question. So Coast Guard is one of the 5 military branches. We have a very strong peacetime mission too. I always kind of describe the Coast Guard as a pocket knife. We have a very sharp blade, but we also do other stuff too.
Yeah.
There's maritime safety, maritime security, maritime stewardship. So we were obviously as a military branch, you're going out and we were in every war that the country's had. and there's that mission.
Actively deployed out?
Correct.
Or
Yeah, actively
protect
deployed
the
out.
homeland?
Yep. No. So we have.
Oh, no kidding. What kind of roles? Yeah.
We specialize in coastal operations. So
okay.
If you need someone who can board boats and get in skinny waters, we're
right.
very good at that. And then obviously there's the search and rescue role that I think a lot of people are familiar with, especially up in the Northeast. And we're that's kind of our bread and butter, and probably what you're most known for, through a lot of movies. And there's also this environmental component where we are also protecting the ocean from man.
Right.
Whether it's oil spills, we're doing a lot of fisheries patrols, whether it's Alaska, New England, down south.
In conjunction, like for instance here, in conjunction with the DMR?
It's like a state entity?
Yeah, like for instance, doing basically what I'm hearing from you is like some work in fisheries.
Sure. Oh, yep.
Acting as its own entity or working in conjunction with other agencies that regulate fisheries?
Both. So Coast Guard, we're on the federal side, so think outside 3 miles.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah, got you. All right, understood.
200 miles on George's Bay.
Regulations change suddenly. It's like, I know, like in the halibut fishery, for instance, it's like one rule out to that line and then another set of rules after that.
Just like federalism, so the states own up to 3 miles and 3 to 200.
Okay, it's not 2 miles, it's 3.
3 miles, yeah.
Okay,
3 miles
right,
for generally state waters.
And then out to the 200-mile mark?
That's the end of our exclusive economic zone, EEZ.
Right. So you guys would patrol that 3 to 200.
That's kind of our
197-mile buffer.
That's
cool, man. Well, thank you for doing that work.
Hey,
that's really awesome.
Good work.
One of the things that I would kind of like to ask you about is, there's this, the sentiment. I see two sort of groups of hunters, I guess. You'd have the sort of new school group, which I think is really has a much more positive view of law enforcement in wildlife. For me, being an adult onset hunter, I don't have a negative view of the wardens. I see them as they steward the resource to me. But a lot of older time, when laws sort of started coming online, you get this group of older folks or people who are raised in that culture who will see it as like Johnny Greenlaw, always out there to bust you. And, you always got to look out for the law. And to me, it's like, well, if you're just following the law, then like, what's the problem, right? But sometimes they have a negative outlook, and then when they interact with those folks, they'll bring some of that to the table. One question I have is like sort of a new boat owner and somebody who's out on the water.
Sure.
Like what are you guys looking for in somebody's like interaction? Like if you have to interact with Coast Guard or if you ever need Coast Guard, any sort of thoughts on that? Like because I'll hear commercial fishermen sort of sometimes speak a little bit negatively, and then other ones who've needed the Coast Guard seem very positive about the Coast Guard's role, in fisheries.
Yeah, I mean, so our background, there's a law enforcement component. And there's also a search and rescue. So you're kind of the police and the fire department.
Oh, yeah, both. Yeah, exactly, right.
But, understand we are there to serve the public. So we're here to ensure people's safety and also ensure, level playing field as well as security of the resource, the long-term viability of the fish stocks.
Yeah, that's cool. And then you're a writer as well. So you were we were just joking that you're like an amalgamation of the two.
Sure.
You said your mom was a writer.
That's right.
And then you do some writing as well.
Yeah, about a half decade ago, I kind of put down a fishing rod and picked up a pen a little bit.
The pen is mightier than the rod.
Yeah, sometimes. Especially started having, we had a couple, our first child, and you got a little more time at home, and you kind of started downloading some of your stories, and started small. I think my first article was about taking my first deer for Hunt Alaska. I was on there online. And then from there, you started kind of building the groundswell, and so I've been doing this a lot, and I think I got some good tips and stories, and it just bounced around the country. You start picking up a tip from Hawaii, and I'm using Hawaiian lures up in the Northeast, and, getting bluefin on them, and you start kind of cross-pollinating.
Oh, interesting. So because you're picking up different techniques and equipment as you move around in your role, in your job, and then you start seeing places where you can move gear, equipment, or styles to different places. That's like I don't know quite how to phrase it, but you're hitting on something that really interests me there. I'm fascinated by that, so I would like to come back to that. But what other publications are you writing for?
I've been out in Hawaii. I was writing for Hawaii Fishing News. And there's another one called Levi. I've written a contributor here in New England for On the Water.
Cool. I subscribe to that. I don't subscribe to too many magazines, but up here in the Northeast, one thing I like about On the Water is that they tailor the New England edition. It's still a lot of Cape Cod and stuff like that, but a lot of Gulf of Maine fishery stuff that because a lot of the magazines, they're just kind of ignoring what we got going up in here to a degree.
Sure.
And it's really nice to get a high quality, nice looking magazine that is tailored to our area. So I like that publication.
Yeah, it's a great magazine. I ended up in Alaska doing some Fish Alaska, wrote for Hunt Alaska, had an article in Alaska Sportsman Journal. So, all those kind of Alaska, New England, and Hawaii is kind of my, if I had to pick three corners of the world, that's where I like to hang my hat.
I was to say, nothing in the Florida Keys, right? That finished all four corners for you.
I've fished in Key West and love it.
All right, so you have fished all the corners of the U.S.
Oh, yeah. I've fished
the extreme corners.
West Coast, Southeast.
Yeah.
I never lived in Key West to become, just solid in it, but cool fisheries down there. Yeah. And then, actually, as kind of mentioned, just finished a book called Fishing the Wild Waters, and focuses on those three regions.
Fishing the Wild Waters?
Fishing the Wild Waters, that's right.
Tell us about it.
Part how-to, kind of part fishing philosophy. Those three areas for me kind of represent the last frontiers of fishing.
Yeah.
The water's big, the fish are big, there's more risk, there's more reward. There's a kind of a cultural and ancient connection to fishing, especially in Hawaii and Alaska. People have been using the same techniques there for hundreds or thousands of years.
You think that's because the European influence is recent there and the indigenous population is still present? Is that why that is like that, or is it because there's still subsistence level stuff? Like, why is that compared to so many places in your mind?
I just think, it's just a very strong culture. The culture of the connection between the land and the sea and the people is very present. Right, it's woven into the fabric of that culture. And even New England here is, it was the first, colonies were built in no small part by fish.
Cod.
And
the whaling here too. I know that it's like, I wish that we could be emotionally neutral about whaling. I know it's going to be a while still before we can look at it like that, and it's like a dirty secret for New Englanders maybe or something, but to me it's a fascinating aspect of this hunt that took place right off of, right here in the Gulf of Maine at certain points, that built the sort of wealth and established this region. So it's like we came over on cod and then built the United States and the Industrial Revolution and the modernized world on whaling.
Yeah, we sure lit it.
Yeah, exactly, definitely. So it's like taking to the sea is a big part of this area for sure. Yeah.
So it's part how-to, part philosophy is. I usually go in a bookstore and first thing I do is go to the fishing section.
Yeah.
I've been doing that since a kid, and
which is like all the way in the far back corner. There's like three.
It's in the back,
books.
And there's always like the half dozen books about kind of like knots and hooks, and you're like, where's a book for the rest of us? And
it is a weakness in the literature. Something I lament to people a lot is if just about any topic, if there's something you want to learn as an adult, you got no problem finding books, workshops, courses, classes. For some reason, hunting and fishing, the literature tends to be storytelling literature, or like you said, a knot book, but there tends not to be really good stuff that sort of eliminates that barrier to entry for people, so that it's just like, I guess it's just been patrilineal primarily, the way it was passed on to people, and if you miss that window, it's like, oh, sorry, you're not going to get to learn. Like, there's no books and workshops or whatever. So, yeah. So tell me like more specifically. You say it about the book. Tell us more in depth about it.
So fishing for me is, it's a vehicle to see the world beyond the one that we created. It's, sunrises out in the 100 fathom line. You're getting to rivers and streams and locations that I would never go to unless I was trying to fish them. And you kind of start feeling this connection to the land and the sea that feels very natural. Instead, I think you lose that, living in the daily grind.
Yeah.
I felt that living up in Kodiak for 3 years where, up there's recreational, commercial, and there's subsistence fishing. So you can still go out and, legally gill net salmon or longline for halibut just because you're a resident in a remote part of Alaska. And you start kind of living your life based on the tides and the rainfall, and it felt very right. And you're filling your freezer with animals that you captured, and you might eat a steak or burger. If you didn't finish it, you throw it in the trash. Like if it's a piece of deer or a salmon, that you caught, like I'm not gonna throw it away. Yeah. I'm gonna eat every. But there's a story to it, and there's connection, and like you said, you just start. I got into cooking now because I got this the world's best protein, and now I'm like, I gotta make sure I can prepare
Suddenly you
this.
start becoming a better cook.
Sure, yeah.
You did good on that deer, man. I thought that came out really nice.
So it just all kind of felt right. And there's a lot of people out there like that. I think there's people are chasing. They're spending a lot of money to buy grass-fed, grass-finished beef that's now mimicking what that deer is doing.
Yep.
And
the more story that you have as a background, the higher the premium on that. So, if somebody can tell you more about that specific animal, where it was raised, what it ate, that allows, you see, it's like, here's your CAFO farm price.
Sure.
And then here's your organic price. Now here's your grass-fed price. But if you're like, well, these are cows only from this region, they only ate this, you got another premium on top of that. In other words, people perceive value in the story.
Sure.
And then that alone should be enough for people to understand a little bit about what we're talking about, even if they've never participated in a fishery or participated in a hunt. It's like, if you're willing to pay a little bit more for the story, then what is this story worth to us? Because maybe it's like hard for people to understand sometimes from outside of it why you'd spend so much money on licenses and tags and gear and boats and all this stuff. But it's like, that's a big part of it. Right?
That's a great point. But even everyone loves to go apple picking. And it's the same thing. Like,
pick your own.
Capturing something from the wild is just like intrinsic to us.
Yeah, it's really who we are. I mean, the change, as you know, it's pretty recent. Given our history. And so it's like, this is so new for us to not do that.
All right. Yeah,
you know what
absolutely.
I mean? It's like, and as soon as you introduce a kid to a raspberry that they can pick, it's like, man, do people light up? It's like the genes in us start to vibrate or something, It's like you immediately perceive it. Something I was hearing you say earlier, we were talking about Hawaii, and you were saying about, what was the word you used to describe the sort of life force that they use?
The mana, M-A-N-A, mana. Yeah.
It's interesting when you have here where we are, you get this like new age culture, and if you adopt the language of that, it can be kind of flaky sounding. But then when there's something more entrenched in a longer, more ancient culture like it's a lot easier to hear that. You're like, oh yeah, mana, no, I know what that is. But if I was like, yeah, bro, the life force, it's like, nah, it sounds flaky, but
right.
But it sounds cool when you say it from the Hawaiian perspective.
Our English language doesn't really, we have a word for everything, but not that feeling I get when I'm out in the rain and the cold catching salmon, and I'm so happy. And there's not a word for that, in our language. So you end up kind of looking at what's Hawaii or Alaska. And, there are words for that. The mana, the life spirit, everything has that that kind of feeling. And when I make a lure, we're talking about kind of make your own fishing lures, like there's a bit of a there's a mana in that. You feel like, hey, this is something special. And I've created someone where it's like, you feel this golden light on it, and sure enough, you're catching
this is
marlin
the
on it, and you're like,
so tell you produce lures as well. Is that something you do commercially, or do you just do that on the side? Or
I started as a kid. I would take like tree branches and cut them, and with a knife, is make like bluefish poppers with them in Connecticut.
No kidding.
And so you're getting, you're starting to catch fish on these pretty simple lures, and bluefish aren't the probably smartest fish in the ocean, but you just feel that same
voracious too.
Like, I can create something, that I'm now fooling a wild animal with, and I got into fly tying as a kid, and then obviously, especially in Kodiak, I was, most of my flies were, hand tied, and then in Hawaii, they're trolling these big resin lures. We talked about some of those, and they're expensive.
If somebody wanted to see, who wasn't really familiar, particularly with like offshore trolling, and they wanted to see an example of the kind of lure we're discussing right now, what would be like search terms that they could just pull up a quick Google search and be like, oh, that's what they're talking about?
Like Hawaii high-speed trolling.
Okay.
Jump on my Instagram site, Sullivan Lures, to see some of the ones
Okay, great.
I've
so you've got on Instagram, people could see it's at Sullivan Lures.
At Sullivan Lures.
Okay, great. We'll put a link to that as well. So just I want people to, as you talk about it, know what you're being able to picture what you're saying. But basically like a clear resin head on that, and then it's got that rubber skirt in the back, and that hook's embedded in there. How big are those hooks?
They're between 12-aught and 8-aught, so they're big. I mean, they're almost across size your palm. Yeah, I mean, the lure is about a foot. I mean, so think of a 800-pound marlin. They're eating things a little bigger than my bluefish popper, but so it's a weighted resin head generally, and then typically 2 squid skirts in the back, and you're just trying to create. You troll them fast, 7 to 10 knots. You could probably troll them even faster if we wanted to. And
they're cruising,
and they're cruising, but you can't run, these fish are built for speed. They can sprint at, 40, 50 knots. So you never outrun one, and they'll see that go, shooting by. And when they hit, I had a friend ask, like, hey, how do we know when we get one? I was like, oh, you'll know. It'll dump 500 yards of line before you can pick your jaw off the deck.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of experience. I fished mahi. I fished like blackfin tunas down in Florida. But no bill fishing experience or anything like that, and no big tunas. So it's a fascination of mine to hear you talk about it. So you've been building those lures. Are they for sale?
They are. I always kind of mostly just sell them, not cost my friends. Started doing that. Really at probably a faster clip in Hawaii. Because out there I could build a lure on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and have it behind my boat on Saturday.
Oh, that's cool, yeah.
And you're prototyping it. If it hooks a fish, I'd cast a molded out lure, and you just that groundswell builds on these, and the tough part was you want to troll all your own lures now and never use any commercial ones. You're like, well, it's not get crazy here. Fished and bite. Was it your lure or was it just nothing there?
Right.
But I custom make them for people and happy to do it. But in the day of, everything is molded in plastic and mass produced, I might take 5-7 days on one lure, hand sanding just to get it perfect. And same thing, I think people recognize that there's an intrinsic value to things that are one of a kind. And,
well, I think too, when you look at the history of like sort of outfitting stores, like a lot of people are really surprised to find out that Abercrombie and Fitch was kind of an LL Bean in its day.
That's right.
You buy a shotgun there. Now you buy like cologne there, right? It's just changed so dramatically.
Jeans, yeah.
And then if you look at LL Bean, I mean, I'm a Mainer. This is not a criticism. I understand this is just where they are in the economic market. But LL Bean is kind of going the like Old Navy J. Crew kind of route. It's still got a nice outfitting department, but you're seeing it change over as recreation starts to outpace the hunting fishing world, even here in Maine. And then Cabela's, another. I'm not a criticism. Well, a little bit of a criticism in that the gear seems to be made a lot more overseas. The quality's a lot lower. It's not like back in the day where you could buy something at a place like that and it's going to last your lifetime. Now it's like maybe it's going to last a season. It's a lot of junk. So sometimes making your own stuff, it's like it's having that story, which we were talking about before, and sometimes just like having quality, right? Because you're like, the stuff for sale sucks, right? I mean, that's a big problem too. But I'd like to talk about, in a minute, I'd like to talk about sort of barriers to entry and cracking through those on fishing. But first, I would wonder if you could kind of give us like a sort of a briefing on those different places. So you fish New England, you fish Hawaii, you fish Alaska. Like, just describe for people the fisheries, what parts what species you've participated in and you fished, and then how those areas are different from each other. I've spent about 6 months in Maui. Nice. So I got a sense of what it feels like in Hawaii. Now, I've lived up here most of my life, but I've never been to Alaska yet. So I'd just love to hear sort of how those places are similar, how they're different, what you fished for, what it's like over there.
Yeah, so I've lived in, I think, 12 different states now. They counted up last night. So I was bouncing around. But those three areas always kind of brought me back for different reasons. But they're also very similar. Here in New England, as we talked about, is just the history here. This is the beginning of the country here, and Portsmouth was founded in 1623. Like, that's pretty cool. Right. And
conservative here compared to Hawaii. And, like, just a conservative. I don't mean politically necessarily, but like the people here. You go to Hawaii, it's like
sure. I mean, it's more refined. It's had
here. It's like no shirts, no shoes, no service.
400 years to kind of have its own rules and culture. But even here off Dollar Shoals off Portsmouth, that was a fishing station for cod. Shoals was the shoals of cod out there. And,
right.
Unfortunately, New England has had some hard times here particularly for ground fish.
Well, we've hammered them for 500 years, right?
Right. Well, we got very good at catching, but they didn't get any technology to avoid us. So, so I think that's tough as you're seeing, the fish stocks aren't there. There used to be swordfish and giant bluefin in close to the rocks, and a lot of the stuff now just you'll never know what you didn't have type thing.
Right.
But it's still just a wild place with the stripers and the ground fish, and you got 1,000-pound bluefin tuna.
So we've got a big bluefin fishery. The big fish.
I was living down in Gloucester, my late 20s. I was I have my own 18-foot boat. First time buying a boat by myself, and steep learning curve for running a boat, and actually, want to get out to the Stellwagen Bank and catch these bluefin. And sure enough, I hooked one. Almost lost my hand doing it. I got stitches from the back of my hand to my palm.
No way, really?
It was a long story short. It was a 5-hour fight. I was out by myself on a Sunday, and I was trolling probably lighter gear.
You're locked onto a bluefin alone in your 18-foot boat
For 5 hours.
What kind of boat was it?
It was a 1988 Invader.
Okay.
Kind of like a center console without a T-top.
It's aluminum or fiberglass?
Fiberglass, old school heavy fiberglass. So one engine, one battery, it was probably not my
And how far
smartest
were you?
move. Stellwagen's about 14, 15 miles south. So I'm out there and
out doing something young and dumb.
I was learning, a teachable moment. Hook up with this tuna and I'm fighting it, and about an hour I see it up on the surface, and then it just sounds. And I was using a Penn Senator 6.0, which is a smaller, little smaller gear, and it's there's no 2-speed. It's just 1 speed, and 1 hour turns to 2 and 3 and then 4, and it's just down. It's not coming up. And at this point, I'm like out of water. Like I'm feeling it, and so I put the rod in a rod holder, like one of those horizontal rod holders. I locked the drag down, 80-pound test. I'm like, either I get the fish, or I'm gonna break it off, and probably a part of me would be okay if I broke it off. It started coming up.
You're getting exhausted.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm down on my knees, and my grunt is just one at a time, and fish comes up, and I gaff it and bring it over the gunnel, and it's about the length of my transom. It's not a giant, but it's.
Had you caught one before?
No, I hooked a couple.
It's your first, and you
first
get it over
bluefin.
the gunnels.
Yeah, so it's
in the boat.
It's in the mid 60s, by 66 inches. So I'm guessing probably low 200s.
You're planning to eat it or sell it?
Oh, eat it. I didn't have
so you're
license.
stoked.
So I'm
man.
stoked, and I knew it's been a long fight, so I was like, I'm worried about it kind of cooking itself. So I go to bleed it, and I did something I usually haven't done. I touched one of those serrated lobster knives. I touched the base of the tail, the caudal peduncle, to cut blood vessel down there, and the fish bucks up, and the tail snaps up. I felt this pinch in my hand. I look down, and I see that inside your hand is hollow, because that knife just exactly cut my hand in half.
Are you saying that the way the muscles will open up, that you got like a hollow
I just
space?
remember looking down and seeing space between, from the webbing of your thumb down to, middle of your, the middle of your hand was just cut straight through. And first thing I remember, I said, I didn't just do that. And you're like, oh, checkmate.
Cut on the knife?
Yeah, so I had the knife blade up, and obviously from 5 hours fighting the fish, my hands were super weak.
Of course, right.
And the fish kicked its tail up, and it just,
whoa,
as fast as you could do it. And I grabbed, the first thing I could was a dirty glove.
Just anything to put
and
the
like my
pressure
palm
on.
was on the back of my hand, so you're trying to keep her, at this point there's no boats around. It's like, I really wish there was a boat around right now. So you're trying to keep her, not pass out and keep cool. And obviously you've,
bleeding much?
Yeah, a lot of bleeding. Yeah. There's an interesting picture of,
and that fish is bleeding.
The fish was bleeding. So
because tuna bleed a lot, huh? And they kick that blood all over the place from what I've seen.
There's a pretty interesting picture of my cockpit of the boat. Where it was like, you can tell where my blood ended and the fish blood started. So I ended up putting a radio call for help, and actually the Massachusetts Environmental Police came over and it would help me out. And there's an ambulance waiting for me back at Gloucester, and got a free ride to the surgeon. And I remember when my then girlfriend, wife Renee, walked in the ER. I had my Grundens on. They unfortunately cut off my favorite sweatshirt, but I'm bleeding, and they're sewing up the serrated knife cut. And because it's serrated knife, and there's a little pile of leftovers a little bit, and she about passes out, seeing
leftovers from your hand.
So went back that night. It was on my dominant hand, I'm left-handed, so went back that night, on painkillers, and flayed out the fish, with my right hand in the dark, and still, got that.
You did,
meat.
yeah?
Oh yeah. They put it on ice for me.
Because that hand must have been completely wrapped up.
It was out of commission, but still, got that meat. And
so, the fish was on the boat still?
No, so they actually able to get it back, and then had some buddies put it in a barrel with water and ice, so it was still in good shape. So got the fish, and
it ate okay.
Ate great. I learned a lot that day.
Yeah.
I got
one of those stories you were talking about.
Got some quick clot for Christmas from my family, kind of half joking, half serious. But
it's funny. Speaking of barriers to entry, I feel like if you come to hunting and fishing with no background in anything around the outdoors, one of the pieces that maybe for some people gets pushed to the back, but I think is really important is trauma care stuff, because it's like once you start getting around broadheads, arrows, hooks, like the chance of trauma starts to go tick up and up and up. And even just some basic, like, not just first aid, but like wilderness first aid type stuff or anything like that, or TCCC for people around bullets, stuff like that can be so important. Like, just so you know how to handle something like that.
That's a great point, is be able to take care of yourself and take care of someone else.
Yeah. But so anyway, we were talking about what the fisheries are like.
Yeah.
So you were telling us that. Sorry.
But New England obviously said just a wild spot, and still some great opportunities. And, there's some New England's been gentrified, but, especially up here is just a lot of wild land. And New Hampshire and Maine is just said full of adventure. And
the White Mountain National Forest is pretty awesome. Like there's some pretty big wilderness up here. So you get north, right? So,
and there's still megafauna on the landscape, moose and bears, and it's just it reminds me of, I kind of call it East Coast Alaska.
Oh yeah, we call it Alaska Light. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. So it's always a special place in my heart up here.
Yeah.
Alaska, I can't put that into words. It's just it's a state of mind as much as a place, and to see that much grandeur, just you can't help but want to preserve that and hope that this will always be the way it is, because it
would be hard for it not to be, would it not? I mean, is it like just infrastructure alone? And I mean,
sure,
it's the weather there. It'd be a hard place to really develop out.
Yeah, I mean,
you're on the frontier kind of.
It's still it's the last frontier. It didn't become a state till the 50s. People I know talk up there like who remember like statehood, and you're like, wow, this is
really
pretty cool. Yeah,
no kidding. That's interesting.
And
that's neat to think about. We were just in Newfoundland, and it was like, similarly, they had only recently become part of Canada, really, I think in the 40s maybe. But there's this culture there of like, well, we're still kind of our own thing. Like, they don't fly the Canadian flag most of the places we were. They flew the Newfoundland flag, So sort of similar.
Yeah. Alaska's a very proud place, and people there are rightly very proud of that.
What was it before then? Was it
It was U.S. territory? U.S. territory, yeah.
Okay.
World War II was, I think, really accelerated that growth. Is the Alaskan Highway, was built, to ensure that we could get supplies up there. So Kodiak is about 250 air miles south of Anchorage, so it's about the size of Connecticut. For a comparison, if Kodiak was your hand, the road system's your thumbnail. I mean, it's a huge, huge wild spot. Most of it's just a national wildlife refuge. 10,000 people, probably about 3,500 bears, and these are the largest bears in the world, the Kodiak brown bear. And the first time you see one, it's like, that can't be real. Like, something that big exists.
Yeah. I got into a really big black bear this year, the first real big one that I'd seen, and that got me starting to look at how big other bears are. Being in New England, I've not been around brown bears, and I started to look at them and really pay attention to the scale of them.
Yeah.
And then the different attitude that they have, and it's fairly intimidating. Yeah.
It's interesting not being the top of the food chain. You fish on
carry a weapon there?
I did, at times, especially I was going to more remote
What'd you
section.
carry?
I think I had a 357. It wasn't anything. For the most part, it's a noisemaker, and it gives you some semblance of some type of self-defense. But as the more you're comfortable, you start seeing these bears, you realize they're not gonna jump out of the woods and just take you out. Especially in Kodiak, because they're out fishing.
Okay, yeah.
On the right
where there's food.
You can start reading their body language like a dog. You could tell a big boar who's agitated, vice a younger bear who's just like trying to catch salmon in the same spot you are. So you end up doing a lot of yelling and shouting. You throw rocks to kind of throw a rock in front of it, let it know that you're there, and then you kind of be smart. I mean, if you're know when to walk away, bears start moving in, and you kind of take your fish and you move on.
I guess one thing I want to ask you about is, in New England here, where there's no apex predator on the landscape. I mean, there isn't one. We have what do they call like coyotes, like a mid-level predator? I forget the term for that. But we have no wolf at present, and we have no confirmed mountain lion population at present. That's at least a breeding population. So we've lived for a long time here without any like sense of danger, and so it allows for a kind of heedless nature experience where you can just kind of roll around in the woods. You don't really have to think about it. How is it different in feeling when there's that sense that you could be consumed by an animal that you encounter frequently too? It's not like they're just a boogeyman. You never actually see them, right? Like people encounter the brown bears there. So like how does the attitude different? If that makes sense.
You're a little more humble. You're aware of your surroundings, what you're doing, where you're at. If you hear a stick snap in the woods, you're gonna spin around a little faster than you would here in New Hampshire. But it comes back to respect. Said these animals are, they're there first, and it's kind of their river. So you got to be smart. You carry a weapon, but as said, the more confident you get, the less and less I was carrying a weapon, less I was going. Said to a further away spot, and unless you get between a sow and her cub, or you're trying to move like a dead deer off the mountain, is for the most part is you kind of,
unless
I've had a couple run-ins in the dark where you're hearing a bear cross the river, it's coming behind you, and you're kind of yelling and shouting, and definitely get your attention. But
it's an animal so big and powerful that like even toying with you, it could kill you. Like it's not like it even necessarily has the intention to kill you. It's just that it's so gigantic. It's like an of mice and men type of situation, right?
But I mean, especially on Kodiak, is relatively few.
It's rare there.
Not a lot of deaths.
I'm curious about this because I've been reading a lot about it. I got invited. I know a guy who wants to go on a grizzly bear hunt. He invited me to come out with him, and I've been reading about it more. And it seems like I encounter two camps of people. One camp is like it's overblown, relax, and then there's this other locked and loaded community of people. And I'm trying to interpret remotely here, like, are these people just jacked up and they want to shoot bears, or are these people being too naive and thinking everything's fine? Because there seems to be a lot of people who get tangled up with bears.
Yeah, so it might be a little more nuanced. They might be both right. So in Kodiak, you have a coastal brown bear.
Who has a lot of food resources.
A lot of food, way more of a social animal.
Got it. As opposed to like a grizzly interior bear who's kind of battling for food a little harder.
Right. So they're way more independent, ornery, not a lot of, they're eating roots, and they're kind of always hungry. So, heard like those Yellowstone attacks, that's a grizzly. Vice a coastal brown bear who's, so full in salmon, it's only eating like its favorite parts of the fish and leaving the rest.
Okay, he's got a buffet.
So he's
all right, because it's like the grizzlies with that sort of specific epithet, infra-specific epithet, and its trinomial Latin name is terribilis, I believe, right? So it's
terrible.
The terrible brown bear, right? Terribilis. So I think it's Ursus. What's the brown bear? Ursus arctos terribilis, I think, is the grizzly. Anyway, so these are not terrible bears. These are fairly nice bears.
Yeah, I mean, especially during salmon season. In the fall, when the salmon slow down, their behavior change to the bears start acting. That's where you're a little more aware of. But respect goes a long way, and knowing when it's time to go find somewhere else to fish. Yeah,
it's just sometimes I really wish that we could have an apex predator here on this landscape, just because I feel like it's so unnatural for people not to live around one. And then we start to have behavior that, like you were saying, there's a hubris that you can have, and you don't know you have it. It's just that you're used to being the dominant. And, you look at, like, for instance, with ballistics, something that just thinking about, reading about the weapons people carry in brown bear country, a weapon that would be a large caliber for a person compared to a brown bear, it's so different. We're, like, soft. We're, like a whitetail, right? Or like a human being is like a whitetail. You look at the weapons that most military units are carrying, it's like fairly low calibers. We're soft and like gushy and stuff, right? And like we feel on this landscape so dominant, but man, I mean, we're not made of much.
No,
you drop us from very far and we go splat.
If you're gonna, if you want to really protect yourself against a bear, it's a shotgun with a copper jacketed slug,
something that goes loud and deep and all of that.
But a handgun's not gonna probably solve your
it's
problems.
just so much animal. It's really amazing. The salmon fishery, man. Tell me about that.
So Kodiak, all 5 species up there.
Oh, man.
And they all using the river, sometimes the same river at different times. They're kind of just the way the species set up is, the first to arrive will be the sockeye, which generally need a lake, a terminal lake, so they're going up rivers with lakes on the end of it. And I call them the river tuna. They're smaller. They probably get to 12 pounds tops, but like you hook one on a fly rod, and they will just take you into your backing. And
12 pounds is a pretty good fish, though.
but you can look at a 50-pound king salmon.
Right.
But really tasty, like that deep red meat, because they're eating a lot of shrimp, so that reflects in its
Okay,
meat.
so it's like that pigment comes from that. Yeah.
And so sockeye, we call them reds. They come up first. Then your pinks come up. Pinks were humpies, and they're kind of, you live the last too long, you can become like a salmon snob. Pinks they're more like a trout texture, kind of soft and delicate, and they don't freeze as well.
People are less fond of that.
And so a nice
snobbery, because I'll eat a trout all day.
Exactly, and they'll come up and they'll start turning pretty quick. So they start going from that dime bright fish to start towards that zombie salmon.
Yeah.
So and they come up like in like the millions, their backs are out of the water. So the pinks show up. They're super fun to catch, especially with like new fishermen or kids. Like, let's go catch one maybe every cast. There's the chum or the dog. It's a bigger fish, up to 25 pounds.
Yeah, okay.
But dog salmon, I can tell you they're probably not the best tasting fish.
But people put them up for their dogs.
They're. I think I imagine I got that name just from being fed to sled dogs.
Mm-hmm.
You see them marked a little bit now as Kita salmon. That's like
that's the marketing name.
That's their market name. That's part of the scientific name. And if you get them in the saltwater, dime bright.
What's the name again?
Kita.
Kita.
Yeah, Keta.
Okay. So this is like sort of when you rebrand. I've read a lot of books on fisheries, and one thing I've seen a lot is like if you can work the name bass into the trade name of a fish that has nothing to do with any bass species.
Chilean sea bass.
It sells, Chilean sea bass. It just sells the fish. And so, Kita being one of those examples of this, right? Rebranding a fish. Because sometimes people don't eat things and it's just some stupid reason that has lingered a long time and it's something great. And other times it's like genuinely not great.
Right.
But
we look at a dogfish, what they call it, Cape shark. It sounds much more regal than dogfish.
Yeah. And interestingly with the dogfish, it's become a big fishery for fish and chips in the UK, right?
That's
to
right.
replace cod. And you catch them in the same fishery. Mm-hmm. But here, the guys still won't even clean one for you, on these headboats out here. I mean, and if you talk about keeping one, they get kind of mad. And I see it, like they'll come up and, the mate or the captain will grab that dogfish by the tail, smash its head off the gunnel and throw it back in the water. And I'm always like, no, I would eat him.
That's still protein.
Yeah. What are you doing?
Yeah.
But anyway, so you were at dogs.
Dogs or chums, but they're very cool. Just as they come up the river, their coloring pattern is pretty neat. It's just a very photogenic fish. And then your last two are the silver or coho. Mm-hmm. And those are kind of like, they do everything. They bite lures great. They fight awesome. They're big, 15, 20 pounds. They come up later. They're kind of like the fourth quarter fish. They're August till, I've caught some. They were pretty zombied out, but I've caught them up until like January. Tell
people what you mean zombied out.
So as a salmon's coming up, it's a saltwater fish, delivered in the ocean from 2 to 5 years, and they spawn in rivers. So as they're entering that river system, they generally stop eating, and they're now their mission is to spawn, because except for the Atlantic salmon,
spawn until you die,
which can spawn multiple times, is Pacific's only you spawn once, and then you die. So they're on, it's a pretty stoic trip of their own death.
So they're not eating. So when you're fishing for them, you're trying to agitate them with a fly or a lure, but they're not actively feeding on. Like when you're casting.
Sure. As you're coming in the river, they're still in that kind of feeding mentality. And, I've caught some with bait fish in their stomach. But as they enter that river system, they get more in fresh water, they'll start
shift over, become
more of you're agitating them, or they'll eat salmon eggs, so they're actually eating other salmon's eggs.
No, really?
So you catch silvers with eggs.
You think that's to sort of reduce the genetics of other fish?
I can't scientifically prove that, but I think it's that's your competition.
That's
so
like a bear eating cubs.
Exactly.
Kind of thing. Okay. Interesting.
As they're going up that river system, which on some rivers in Kodiak are very short, a couple miles, and the Yukon, other examples of thousands of miles, but they're eating nothing. So they're burning their own fat and muscles, and they change, completely from a bright fish to, vivid reds, and greens, and they'll get this big hump in their back, and their jaws change to get these big
that
teeth.
kite.
Yeah, and it's at the end of their life is they're half alive and their skin is peeling off their body. They're still trying to swim, and
they get pretty lean, I imagine, losing their body
they're
fat.
lean, and all that color in their meat is now reflected in their skin, so their meat's very pale, and you could poke a hole through it with your finger.
Okay, no
so
kidding.
It's just it's
when you get into them early, are they good eating?
Talk about any salmon or just?
Oh no, these ones here. We're talking about coho, right?
Oh yeah, phenomenal.
Right.
Just absolutely phenomenal. Yeah, as long as they're silver, and especially get them in with sea lice. That means they're fresh.
Okay,
they may have came in that day.
Right.
They're great. And the last species is the king or Chinook. It's the king. It's
on the decline, no?
They're having a bad couple of years, and I think biologists can't figure out why. Is it a climate, seawater temp rise? Is it overfishing, or is it bycatch?
Right.
Probably some combination of all. But
is that what you think?
It's I mean, I said I probably can't speak enough on the exact cause, but I think all those are worth exploring, and that's the iconic fish of Alaska.
Right.
The 50-pound king salmon is just like once you start catching one of those, you become like a cult. Like you can't stop trolling for big kings,
right.
and but to lose the kings in Alaska would be to lose a bit of Alaska. So they're trying real hard to very very protective.
And the people are on board. It sounds like because there's been a lot of reductions in the fishery. Right?
Sure, and that's a good point. Is I think maybe just being a newer state and maybe seeing some of the past fishery management on the East Coast where you had the fish were fished out, and I think Alaska had learned from that, and so. Fishermen and biologists and managers are pretty much in lockstep. And,
right. That's cool.
Because
here you look at like our salmon fishery, because now if you wanted, we talk a lot about our stripers. Yeah. And we talk striped bass. We have our ground fishery, we have our bluefins, but we had such an incredible salmon fishery.
Sure.
And, now with ESA protections, thank God, because the fish is nearly extirpated from most of our waters. Right. But here we had this, because I'm just always amazed that salmon is so associated with the West Coast, and it's almost like people forgot. Right. They just have forgotten, but it wasn't that long ago that it was one of the key fish in our fishery.
Hey, we'll get right back to the interview in a moment, but first, domesticated, civilized living restricts the natural movement of your human body, forcing you daily into chairs, cars, and rigidly defined pathways. But when we head out onto wild landscapes, we carry these dysfunctional, domesticated movement patterns with us. MoveNat is a natural movement system that trains you and your body to move like a human animal again. Are you interested in building natural movement skills that'll improve your physical capability in the field and in everyday life? MoveNat's new Level 1 Fundamentals e-course is structured to help you re-educate your body using practical, natural movements that enhance fitness, function, and physical capabilities, all from the convenience of your home. Learn to move the way nature intended. I attended MoveNat's Level 1 and 2 trainer certification courses a few years back and came away with practical knowledge and skills that I use every day and that have changed the way I train and move across the landscape, vastly improving my overall mobility, coordination, and fitness. This new e-course is movement-rich with clear instruction. Its progression-focused methodology takes you from restorative mobility exercises to challenging movements. All ability levels are welcomed and accounted for. Enroll now at wild-fed.com/MoveNat for instant access to the full e-course. Again, that's wild-fed.com/MoveNat, MoveNat. Again, wild-fed.com/MoveNat for instant access to the full e-course containing 16 classes designed to be followed over 4 weeks with specific and measurable movement goals for each week. The course is self-paced and you'll receive lifetime access. MoveNat. I can personally recommend it. It's a fitness and movement system that's designed for the wild. Now, back to the show.
and when you look at farmed salmon, I don't know if people are farming any of the West Coast salmon, but primarily when you buy farmed salmon, it's Atlantic salmon. They eat great, right? So it's like a fantastic food fish.
Sure.
And I hope that people over there are looking at us and seeing what happened to our fishery, because, you know, it's one of those things, you mentioned it earlier, sometimes you don't know what you had.
Right.
But
imagine seeing salmon flowing up the river here, like, you know, it'd blow your mind.
And then we were chasing them in Newfoundland, but I mean, we only saw a handful of them. You know, it just felt like, and the idea that you could fish for them was really shocking to me.
Sure.
You know, it was.
Could you keep them?
Well, you had tags, full-on tags, and I think I paid $100. I got 6 tags, but I was really only allowed, and 2 tags per river.
Okay.
The different river systems. It was barbless hooks only, fly only, and I was really only allowed to use 1 of the tags, even though they gave me 2 for the river we were in. So it was like you could keep 1 for the season, basically.
Gotcha.
And, you know, like you mentioned, they're not feeding. It wasn't like, you know, this kind of thing where you're seeing them finning out of the water.
Yeah.
And backs are, you know, it wasn't that like you can walk across their backs and get to the other side. It was like there's 1 there, there's 2 there, and I don't see any others. It was sparse
working
too.
pretty hard. Yeah.
You'd be working pretty hard. You're not going to subsist on them, but
Sure.
But it was neat to me the fishery's still alive. But I mean, what a loss that we have.
Sure.
Here, you know, and then to lose the cod, it's just like the idea of mismanaged fisheries in other places. It's like, you know, you want to just shout from the rooftops, like, man, get on top of it now, because it's so important. But
and Alaska's it, and that's kind of the last. You know, there's still fisheries that are still being fully understood, and so they're really trying to protect that, and you know, be precautionary approach of, hey, if we don't know, we'll take just you know, we'll take less than we think just to preserve that.
Right.
That's it.
What other fisheries up there did you participate in?
Yeah, I mean, the big 2 obviously are salmon and halibut. And,
I wanted to hear about that.
I love halibut fishing. It's fun. You know, it's you know, they're a big fish. You know,
are you tub trawling for them? How are you doing?
So you could, as a resident in Kodiak, you could long line for them. But generally, I just go out and rod and reel just because there's fun.
No way, really.
And you know, you get
they're dense enough that you can.
Oh yeah,
it happens here, but it usually as a byproduct of fishing for ground fish, right?
Yeah,
it's
I mean, it's pretty rare to see one on a headboat out here.
Yeah,
definitely.
They get a few a season.
Sure. But up there, yeah, I mean, if we didn't limit out every day, like I felt
really,
like I was on me, like, you know.
Oh man.
But yeah, we'd anchor up or drift depending on where we're at, and fish.
And how much water would you be in?
So I won't give away all my secrets here, but I started to catch some big halibut in some very small water. You know, because they're
you have to get the book.
You may not even find the book. You know, so they're following the salmon up, especially the pinks up in the rivers, and so I was starting to find spots where I could get them in shallow. I was getting, you know, fish over 100 pounds in 50, 60 feet of water.
Wow.
And, you know, they can't run down, so now they run horizontal. And it's like, you know, they're not used to that either, so they're freaking out.
Yeah.
But generally, I'm out in 150 to 220. You know, you kind of find, you know, they're an ambush predator, so you'd set up on a spot where, you know, they think of them in a tree stand as, you know, they're looking somewhere there's food source and they're going to be in some cover, generally down current, you know, so if there's a hump or a ledge, they're right behind that, and as fish are coming over that ledge, as they'll come up and
grab them from below.
So you start kind of appealing to their ambush ways, and
so you'd need a pretty good picture of the bottom to accurately do that.
It definitely helps. You start, you know, like
pretty good at reading the fish finder.
Yeah, I mean, I could look at any chart and you start looking for irregularities. So there's a pinnacle, and if I was catching rockfish and stuff, I knew I was too close to the rock, so I'd slide back to more like a gravel bottom.
Rockfish there means you're talking about those redfish.
Correct. Yeah, Visa striper out here.
Okay.
So yeah, rockfish are.
Just for people listening, rockfish here in Maine or on the East Coast, typically referring to striped bass. And if we say redfish up here, we're talking about the same genus as what you're talking about as rockfish there. But then if we go south and we say redfish, now we're talking about red drum. So it gets these colloquial names get pretty confusing. Right?
So we'll call them rockfish. So officially a rockfish up there.
Old? Those fish get old, huh?
Yeah, and you know, the yellow eye rockfish could be 100 years old. And
I always feel weird if I kill some. I mean, Like I don't know what those taste like.
Sure.
I know what the redfish here tastes like, and they also get quite old. And I'm keen to eat one. I mean, they're fantastic. I really like them.
Sure.
So if I get one and it's legal, I usually want to keep it. But I always have that weird feeling of something that's older than me. You know,
This thing's been through depression, and now
yeah,
you come along.
yeah. Like then I come along,
snuff it out,
snag it accidentally on a cod lure. You know.
Yeah. It's especially the yellow eye rockfish. You know, they get big and they're like fluorescent orange, and they taste good. And but there'll be times where you're like, all right, we got to move. Like you're catching too many. You're like,
Okay.
we got to just kind of get off this. But they're just generally on the rock pile. So yeah, we'd fish for halibut on the gravel behind the rocks, and you kind of drop it down. It's kind of like the goat in Jurassic Park. Is you're just waiting, and then when it hits, like hold on.
What would you use as bait?
Herring is probably most typical.
Cut or like?
Usually cut.
Yeah.
One day we caught a giant Pacific octopus. It was probably like 5 foot across, and we kept it. We started using that for bait, and it was like the world's best bait because it doesn't come off the hook.
Yeah, nice firm
and
flesh.
it's like the leg is probably as thick as a baseball bat.
Yeah,
and we caught a lot of
Hard
halibut off that octopus, and I think the glories in the big ones is we'd call them chickens, the ones under like probably 50, 60 pounds, and I think they little. Like anything, the bigger animal gets, it's probably a little coarser. So we always try to keep the chickens, and
Can I? This is. I want to come back because I want to still talk about Hawaii too after we talk about Alaska. But this, I just want to take a little sidetrack here on this and get your feedback and how you see this. As somebody who comes into hunting late in life, I am not very motivated by the trophy animal thing. It's interesting to me. If I get a big buck, like I've got a big buck on the wall that it was really neat to me, and he ate good. I got a big alligator, and it's like that didn't eat good, and I was really worried about the level of PCBs in him after 50 years of living, down by the Albemarle Sound or whatever. Like, so. Same with my big bear recently. It's like, man, this bear's been around a while. How much environmental pollution has he bioaccumulated over the course of time? Something you said to me earlier was, before we started recording, you were showing me the lures that you make, and you said you started using other materials other than lead because you got kids around.
Right.
And you don't want to be probably smelting lead here in the house.
Absolutely.
Right? Because that gets into, that's lipid soluble, gets in your body fat, gets in your bones, and then over time you accumulate it. And the older you are, the more you accumulate this stuff, right? So we go down to the butcher, we buy some beef. Nobody goes in and says, you got anything that's like maybe 10 years older than this cow? Like it's a 2-year-old cow, right? It's a 1-year-old to 2-year-old animal that we're typically eating. Of chicken, you're eating it the year it was born, right? It's not like, but then when we start getting into hunting, because the influence of sport hunting, I mean, it's so complicated. I don't let you talk here in a second, but let me just get all this out here. So I got a good question for you. The market hunt was wiping out animals. Not just extirpating a lot of them, but in some cases like the passenger pigeon causing full out extinction. This is hunting for people who don't hunt to be able to eat the hunted animals, right? The market hunt, You're selling that stuff into the market. That's kind of what hunting was for a long time. And then that became so repugnant to people as we started losing wildlife and losing species that this idea of shifting hunting into sport hunting emerges. And then because it's treated like a sport, it starts to be about the biggest, oldest animals, which is different than how predators on the landscape act, right? Predators on the landscape aren't going, I'm going to find the biggest, most dangerous buck, risk my life and maybe get gored to death so I can eat a big old buck. It's like, I'm going to take the weak one, I'm going to take the old one. But you almost get laughed at if you do that as a hunter. So there's this sense of, well, I better get the big one so that the guys think I'm cool. Now me, I'm like, I'll love a little buck. I love does. I would rather have that 4-foot alligator. It's going to eat better. And I'm not going to have those pollution concerns. And you just brought it up with the halibut. So this is an interesting component because most people aren't posting online like, check out how small this halibut is. It's look how gigantic it is.
Right. And
I'm just curious, like where you fall in all of that, like how you see all of that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question.
Kind of a question. So.
Well, I guess on the fish side is, I talk about mercury, and I think that's a concern, especially in Hawaii. You get a big marlin, that fish has been around for 15, 20 years, and all that bioaccumulates. And at the time my wife was pregnant and had little kids, like you're mindful of what you're feeding them. I still think the health benefits of fish outweigh unless you're fishing like a super fun site, the health benefits of any wild fish will outweigh any potential impacts of mercury. And I think fish get a pretty high bar. People are very concerned about mercury levels in fish, but no one ever talks about like what's that cow eating? What do we really know?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, because a lot of domestic stuff people buy is also pretty laden. It's younger, but it's laden with all the stuff that they inject it with or feed it.
But I've also never met someone who had mercury poisoning from fish.
Yeah, I haven't either. This seems to be overblown. But okay, hang on. There's this nuance that you never hear talked about. They'll tell you it's okay to eat mackerel, but eat less striper, right? But they never say, but if the striper is younger or smaller, it's going to have less. That's too nuanced for how they lay it out, right? So like that's a component, is because we always talking about, one of our talking points as hunters and anglers is we'll say it's beyond organic. But then we all know inside, like, well, this duck has been feeding on GMO corn for through the whole flyway, right? Or whatever. That's stuff that we don't want to discuss as much, but that's less impactful the younger the animal is, right? So if you had a smaller fish that you fed to the wife and kids, it's like less of an impact than if you feed them, like you were just saying, this big 20-year-old fish.
Sure. Yeah, and it's very complex, and people always want to eat the healthiest food, and they think there's poison in this fish, and I'm now feeding my wife or kids poisonous fish. Right? It's not. I don't think it's always that case, and the recommendations. I think anything else is everything in moderation, including moderation. Is you eat some fish, you eat some deer, and if I'm just eating large marlin, you might eventually start having problems.
How is marlin, by the way?
It's actually really good. Like, kind of same topic is fish under 200 pounds are very good grilled, but a large marlin is generally smoked.
Is it oily?
No, it's it's comparable to tuna. It's it's more like a meat taste.
Red meat,
dark red. Yeah. I like it, and there's blue marlin tastes different than striped marlin, which tastes different than spearfish or sailfish, and but out there in Hawaii is if they keep marlins, they're going to eat them, and they're good to eat.
Because I hear very little about eating of any of the billfish these days.
Sure.
Like it seems to me that the catch and release ethic has gotten quite big in that culture.
Sure.
At least in the sport fishing culture, right? But fish must die all the time, just in the way that accidentally.
Right. I mean, if you want to save a marlin, is don't go out marlin fishing, because it's a life and death battle for one of the two involved.
Right.
So in the East Coast, I think the Atlantic marlin were in a little rougher shape than the Pacific. So there's a higher bar. You can only keep a couple. Also in Hawaii, you can with a simple state license, you can sell fish.
Oh wow.
So you could keep a couple mahi and sell the marlin, pay for gas, and you kind of
Oh, neat.
And guys are.
Would you rather eat a mahi or a marlin?
I would rather eat a mahi.
Yeah, any day of the week, I bet.
Yeah,
mahi
good. And we call them ono or wahoo, or just like they're so good.
Okay.
But my mantra is always catch and release for biological reasons, not political. So don't. I try to put fish on a pedestal. It's if the species is in good shape, and it's not going to be keeping a marlin or a bonefish is not going to impact its the species population. Is you're going to eat it, go for it. But my dad was growing up is like, you keep it, you eat it. So if you're keeping a marlin, like, you better eat it all. You better have a lot of friends.
I've been hearing a lot of the guides in Maine, because there's starting to be this question about striped bass. Mm-hmm. Should we keep any, or should we put them all back? And it's a fishery that, unfortunately for us in Maine, those fish have to cross the gauntlet of many states, some of which have commercial take before they get to us, right? And so even if we might not be eating that many of them up here, they're getting hammered pretty hard on their way up the coast, and then they get hammered again on their way back down, right? But I like to keep one or two, if I can. But I'm starting to feel like, people aren't liking that. There's starting to be more and more push against that. The guides in particular, one of the things that I've heard them express is that a lot of times the customer wants to keep the fish, and they're like, I know this person is not going to eat this fish. I know they're staying in a hotel.
Interesting.
They have no cutting board there.
Yeah.
They're not going to freeze this fish. Like, they just want to keep it because it came over the gunnels of the boat. And but I am curious, like, on that, just here in Maine, like, what do you think with the state of the striped bass?
I haven't looked at their last stock assessment to give you an accurate picture, but you're right. It's a they're generally spawning in the Chesapeake Bay and some in the Hudson River, and they're swimming up and down the coast, and they're probably the most popular game fish on the East Coast.
It's a cult following,
and they're fun. They get big and they're voracious, and they taste good.
They taste really good.
Interesting thing with stripers is they're a state fish, so you can't keep them outside 3 miles. So it's a bit of like a closed area. If the fish, and I've caught some big stripers trolling for bluefin out on Stellwagen Bank, and
have you? Yeah.
Yeah, they'll come up and hit like a spreader bar, and you're like, oh, it's a 40-inch striper out here
Offshore.
Yeah, they'll
really.
So that's.
I think of them as being an inshore species.
But they'll push out a little bit, especially there where it's a bank and there's some structure.
Right.
So it gives them probably some relief that they can dip out to federal waters and catch
But out
a
there,
break.
they're like essentially federally protected.
Right. But they're in bad shape. They're back in the 70s and 80s, combination of overfishing and then a lot of pollution in the Hudson and then the Chesapeake Bay. But they've definitely come back. And then it seems like just anecdotally there's been a bit of a concern in the last couple of years.
Yeah,
that they're
in the last few years, yeah.
I think it's just, they're very popular.
Yeah.
You're seeing, I think, states looking at, the 2 fish limit. You really need 2 big stripers. And
well, here in Maine, we're in New Hampshire right now. In Maine, we're 1 fish per day, but it seems like they're managing for trophies is what my opinion is on it, because it looks like what it is it's 1 fish over 28, which means, well, we got to let everybody get their big fish that they want to keep. And it's like, well, those are breeder fish.
Sure.
Like, why don't we keep one smaller one? Like a natural predator would take a small one.
Sure.
And the fish learn to recover from that. But if you're taking the breeders out, that's the only fish you're allowed to keep. That's a kind of awkward scenario.
And that's,
right?
The slot limit. You see there's some species, whether it's red drum down south, even I think stripers in the Chesapeake Bay used to be like, 1 or 2 fish over 18 inches. And I think there's a plus side of a fish over 28 has spawned, so at least it's had an opportunity to pass on, and a fish under that may not. You'd be taking a fish that never got a chance. So there's the people who manage fish, obviously they're very good at it. And
a lot of times the commercial fishermen, a lot of them seem to almost think like the fisheries management is like to shut them down.
Sure.
And so you'll hear that a lot of times, or other times sometimes it'll be like as if it's super simple and not a heavily nuanced thing, right? I mean, I imagine this is very complicated and there's so many variables, so I hate to try to make it like crazy simple, like, oh, they should just do what I think they should do. I know it's complicated, but
well, I mean, they're trying to do the right thing.
Yeah.
You're trying to measure something you don't see. You're like not out there counting trees. Like, you never know how many stripers are out there based on,
right. It's a good point.
You're netting small stripers in the Chesapeake Bay, and you're doing sample sizes.
Using some algorithm to try to build out a population.
You're taking in fishermen's input. But fisheries management is managing fishermen, and that's hard, especially for commercial fishermen.
Oh, that's a good point. As opposed to like managing the fish themselves.
Yeah, I mean, you're managing the fish, but you're managing someone's ability to
the people taking the fish.
Pay for the dog's braces because you're taking.
Right.
And that's, especially I think, places like New England where the fish stocks aren't doing that good, it's now here really tightening down, the last little bit. Like, you and I can't keep cod right now recreationally.
Well, they opened it up in September, like one fish per day.
I went out, I didn't get one.
It feels like this like huge opportunity almost. Like, oh my God, I can keep a cod, when it was like, man, I mean, the abundance of cod. But one of the side things about that that's been challenging is when you're ground fishing, the number of cod that you catch and then put back and watch seagulls pick their eyes out.
Tough,
that's really hard too. Where you're like, this rule does lead to the death of a lot of cod too, and it's just I don't know how to get around that exactly. Because you feel like, well, why don't I just keep it? It's dead. Like, it died in the process. And what I'm talking about for people listening is when you're fishing 350 feet down and you haul this fish up and his swim bladder expands so much that his stomach is pushed out of his mouth and his eyes bug out, and then you put him back in the water and he kicks a little but can't get even down below the surface, and then eventually the birds are right on him. You're like, now I just killed a cod, but I'm not going to eat it.
Sure.
And the seagulls, I mean, it's not going to waste, but it's frustrating because it's like, can I fillet it first? And they always tell you on the boat, they're like, oh, you can keep it. If you want to pay the $750 fine, it's all yours.
Yeah, that's tough to see that happen. And,
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah, ground fish, unfortunately, they swim together. So if you're haddock fishing, you're also cod
You
fishing.
catch them all, yeah.
You might get a pollock,
Yeah. Oh, that's frustrating. All right, so I want to hear a little bit about Hawaii, and then because I think that must be a very exciting fishery down there in certain regards, and then I want to talk about the sort of barriers to entry and sort of a little bit about how people who are listening to this who are like, man, a lot of this is over my head. I don't really fish much yet, but I want to. And I want to talk about how, like, learning a fishery and kind of getting going. But tell us about what it was like to fish down there.
Yeah, so Hawaii is it's a cool spot. I lived there as a kid. It was like first, second, third grade. My dad was stationed out there. He was actually captain of a ship. So some of my first memories of fishing, and even just, it was a very formative age. We'd go out, and I was, said by 8 years old, was catching mahi that were about as tall as me. And, I knew how to live bait tuna for marlin, and it just, it set in motion something I probably didn't know about at that time. And as I came, since leaving, I always want to get back there. And obviously, it's a tough spot to get back. And you're not the only person who wants to get out to Hawaii. It's a little competitive, but able to get back out there. And
you mean to be stationed out there? To be
stationed out there, yeah.
There's a lot of competition for those spots.
Yeah, I mean, it's Hawaii's a small spot.
They're moving me to Hawaii. Oh, God. Yeah.
But I was able to get back out there, and I wanted to buy a boat, and I wanted to really get into that fishery. So I was able to found a boat. It was probably about 4 feet too short, 18 and a half, 19-foot boat, and you really need about a 24-foot boat out there. Big water. I'm comfortable saying I've seen more consistently worse weather summertime Hawaii than summertime Alaska.
Really?
It's just always cranking out these. They call it the trade winds. Mm-hmm. There's a pretty much stationary high northeast of the islands. It's always 15 to 25 out of the east. And I lived on the windward side in Kailua on the island of Oahu. And it's usually like 4 to 6 offshore. Then you could have a swell that could be 15 to 20 foot.
Wow.
And you're leaving the channel, everything.
In an 18-foot
boat. 18-foot boat, surrounded by coral. So you get one little channel to shoot, and you're trolling at 9 knots. So you hit a wave, and then the wind kicks in your face. And 6 hours of that, you're like, all right, we're doing it.
Yeah, pass the Dramamine.
And where Alaska is just the bounty and the biomass is so huge. Hawaii it's not. The water's crystal clear, which tells you
it's a desert.
It's a desert, and every fish is a nomad.
I would have thought there's so much structure. I don't know why. I would have just imagined with all the way the islands are cropping up out of the sea there, and they're still kind of growing in some areas, right? So I wouldn't have thought about that, so that's interesting.
Yeah, the coral reefs are obviously just a huge, structure, and that is the environment, for a lot of the fish. But
offshore,
I was always looking for the pelagics, marlin, tuna, mahi, ono, and so out there you're trolling. In the East Coast, I always joke you'd run 100 miles to get to 100 fathoms, and I was like, we're at the 100 fathom curve, this is deep. Out there, I would start at the 500 fathom line, and that could be 2 or 3 miles off the beach. And then, generally you get out to the 1,000 fathom.
Wow.
And you're like,
it's kind of like with heights where you're like, why does it scare me more up here than down here? Because fall from either is lethal.
Right.
Why does it get weirder as I get higher and higher up? But I feel that same thing. If we're ice fishing over really deep water, it just feels different to me. I don't know why, but it's
That's a good point.
There's sort of a sense of risk.
I could go down the bottom, but yeah. So you're out there in big water and in a pretty small boat.
Wow.
Single engine. And, with just my professional background, just know that bad things happen.
Yeah,
and so I carried 2 EPIRBs. I carried enough water.
Tell people what that is, just so they know.
Essentially, it's a EPIRB and a PLB, so personal locator beacon or emergency position indicating radio beacon. Essentially, it's a satellite-based signal that if you get in trouble, you flip the switch, goes to satellite, gets to the Coast Guard, and
Cavalry
then
comes.
Takes the search out of search and rescue.
Yeah.
So I leave very detailed float plans, which is very important for any fishing trip or hunting trip. But I'll be here. Got circle on the chart. I'm being here. I'm launching this time. I should be back by this time. Just because if I went missing, is next stop is maybe a couple thousand miles away.
Right.
So kind of batch your take care of yourself. Trauma wise, you bring some trauma gear and
some water.
Brought a lot of water, and if I'm out by myself, I stopped doing that. I think realized it was probably too dangerous, but I'd wear a life jacket with my EPIRB on it and a knife and a signal mirror, and I'd sometimes tie myself off to the boat so I wouldn't go over.
Oh yeah. Wow.
But you're out there, and you're generally it's trolling. So every fish is pelagic, which means it's open water. It's not associated with the bottom, and then these fish are nomads, and it's a desert, like I said. So you're looking for, there's nothing more exciting to a fisherman than seeing a piece of trash. If I see a tree would be gold, but even a small milk carton you're going to go past that, because fish like mahi-mahi are very associated with floating debris.
Well, because that, if I understand it, I mean, I've done really well under like a life jacket that's just floating in there. But you got bait fish will kind of accumulate under there in the shade too, right? And
exactly.
So it becomes a place where then those pelagics are picking off bait fish, and you'll get any structure, right?
Exactly.
So it's like you get structure.
It's like the palm tree in the desert. Like you're just going to walk towards the palm tree because it's like
right,
there's something,
it's
and
something
nothing
there. Yeah.
Hawaii actually has FAD buoys, fish aggregating devices. They actually anchor buoys. I think there's 50 something.
Oh, neat.
Just for the purpose of essentially
interesting.
establishing like something, the palm tree. So we'd hit the FAD buoys, and then we'd go out looking for open schools, and you're looking for a bird, and you could tell by the bird species and its behavior what kind of fish it was, and then what's going on there. So there's boobies were very associated with mahi-mahi, shearwaters and terns. I'm looking at tuna, or like a frigate bird, we call them Eva birds, or they might be following a marlin,
so
and you
cool.
could actually I had a buddy who was actually picked off a marlin off the bird, trolled past the bird and got the marlin he was following. So you really, like we talked about, is using, you are part of the environment, and you're another hunter out there with the birds and the whales. And
I'm glad you said that, because I think one of the things that like for me, a big part of WildFed is about connecting people through the process of getting into food, connecting them deeper into ecology, using food as the sort of bait to draw somebody into it, right? And pretty quickly you realize, it's not just about the thing I'm targeting. I need to know about these trees and their mast, or I need to know about these associated birds, or I need to know about all these things that this animal eats. And before you know it, to learn that one species, you're learning 20 species, and all of a sudden your network in your mind of species and what you know about them starts growing and growing, and you realize it's about a lot more than your target, right?
Yep.
That's really
you
neat.
are now part of that ecosystem, and it feels kind of right. It feels like I belong out here, and you're trolling at said between 7 and 10 knots, and if you see that, you call them bird piles, and the birds start working bait fish, and all of a sudden it's they found a school bait, and the fish are pushing them up from the bottom, the birds on the top, and
feeding friendly.
You go past, and when you hear your outrigger snap, and all of a sudden the line's dumping off these big Penn International 130s, and it could be like a small mahi, or like you see a fish come out of the water. It's like, I've never seen something that big, 16-foot marlin tail walk, and you're like, man, here we go. And that was
this marlin, by the way, you said over here you've got this bill here on the wall. How big was that fish?
That was 611 pounds.
And how long was it?
Just over 16 foot.
I'm having a hard time really picturing that. That's a lot of fish, man.
So I tied off the bill on the bow of my boat. The tail is right at the transom.
Man, it's incredible.
It's like Santiago, Old Man the Sea tournament. So that was a 5-hour fight. But I had bought this boat, and I had kind of weaponized it. I started, I reinforced the gunnels with mahogany. I took all the rod holders out. I put in new rod holders, with epoxy, and these are all silver rod holders. So the fish, the rod would follow the fish. I built my own harpoon out of bamboo.
Oh, cool.
After I cut my hand in half, I was like, all right, we got to, no more green fish in the boat for me. You do that twice, people start talking. But once you get away with it, so, where people see that fish, I got a big fish, that was my diploma of, 4 years of studying. And, there are numerous trips. And, my little brother Patrick was out there with me as we go out, and you troll for 6-10 hours and just nothing. I mean, not even a knockdown, when you get a fish at least hit the lure, because I think you're looking for nomads, and you're going at 9 knots and they're going at 9 knots, and you're just like out there chasing each other around. And it was, to doing that, you get so detail obsessed, is, every knot had to be perfect. Every time I'd recrimp the leader, and I'd sharpen the hooks, to razors, and everything that I could control had to be just dialed in, and I'm sure, you know,
for that one opportunity that comes too, right? It's like the last thing you want is some self-caused, you know, user error. Right?
And there's so many things you can't control. So things you can control, you
want
just
to control
dive into
them.
it. But you know, something when that fish hit is like I knew every connection was perfect. You know, I got a new line on that reel the week before. I crimped that leader recently. Like I could tell, like, you know, in that 5-hour fight, like I wasn't losing fish due to my gear.
Yeah. What do you think about it? That I want to just kind of ask you about that attention to detail, because man, I notice a lot of people, it's like their knives are not that sharp, their guns aren't actually sighted in well, you know, they're off the mark. The quality of ammunition might be a failure point, their knots are wrong, their line weights are wrong. Like what do you think about that as far as like success and failure that people have, especially because a lot of people are going to be learning as adults that we're talking to now, and it's like, man, there's a lot of things to think about. But if you're not thinking about them, boy, you can have a lot of problems come up.
That's a great point. Yeah, details matter. I mean, you have to be brilliant in the basics. You know, if you're gonna go out hunting, you know, what you're carrying with you needs to be, you know, dialed in. And it kind of goes back to, you call it a discipline, and it's a discipline that it's a self-discipline. You need to really control the variables that you can, because there's so much stuff you can't. You know, you're gonna have situations which, you know, trolling is you're going to hook up 2 marlin at once, which I did, and like all of a sudden they're going opposite directions, or you know, I've had dolphins or whales start chasing your tuna, and like there's, you know, you get tangled up in lobster gear, like this stuff it's going to happen. But
some of that you're only going to learn from experience.
You can learn,
right?
and it's what's going to happen is going to happen. But
sometimes you're successful, and then you're like, oh, I didn't think about what I was going to do if I was successful. Like, do you know what I mean? Like from bear hunting, for instance, it's like I've had to learn, dude, bring a tarp because you're going to cut this bear in the field. Bring lots of bags because you're going to put all these different parts in different places. Like, it took me a little while to like dial in what I was going to need. I was thinking about everything up until the shot, and then not after the shot. Yeah, it's like, so you see sometimes people aren't really ready to deal with it.
That's a great point. Yeah, kind of after the shot.
Yeah.
That'd be a good title. You know, before I go fishing, a lot of times I'm always, especially why I can't sleep, and I'm like mentally rehearsing, you know, what lure I'm going to run, and when I hook up, who's going to do what and what I'm going to do. And you start to kind of like talking yourself through it, and, you know, am I going to gaff it or harpoon it? And you kind of go through it yourself once. So when it happens, is you're not shouting, you know, contradictory orders and yelling and screaming all right, I've prepared myself for this. And it's discipline. I think it comes with maturity. And if you're new to the game, you're going to make mistakes. Like, accept that. Like, that's how you learn. You know, that's okay. And like, I can tell you, you know, all my mistakes it took to get to that point of success.
It's just, if you're going to start in your 30s, right, or something like that, your 40s, like, you don't have the first 3 decades to make mistakes and learn from. So you got to, the learning curve's so steep. You've got to jump ahead by learning from other people's mistakes, right? And you got to learn quickly, because you can't burn 3 decades practicing, you know. Man, what do you think are actually, last question about Hawaii. Did you do any diving there?
I did. I did some spear fishing.
So that's something we do it a little bit here in Maine, but it's like a novelty thing. You know, I've got one friend who's hardcore with it. Well, it's dark too. You can't see anything. And then when you get down there, there's not really anything. It's not like we have reef systems with tons of fish, right? So, and then I'm sure Alaska's spear fishery is probably somewhat slim. So
there's people who do it. I mean,
they
dive
people
there. Who dive there, awesome. Dry suits, and I never did. I didn't have the right dry suits. It's you know, it's a whole different discipline. It's like I was too busy, you know, chasing salmon, halibut.
Like you were having fun.
Yeah, spearfishing in Hawaii that's the place to do it. And there's some very good pelagic spear fishermen with, you know, blue camo who are diving on.
Oh yeah, with those buoys,
and getting, you know, some amazing catches. And I brought my gear out with me on the boat, just in the event that we came across like mahi that wouldn't bite. Like, we had a third option.
Right.
Never had that happen. Or a couple of days we tried, my brother and I, is just, you know, the wind was cranking, or his current's too fast, and you get in trouble pretty fast. Yeah, you gotta. But we'd work the reefs, go out. It's kind of like, you know, it's like hiking. You know, I like hiking, but you give me a gun, now we're hunting. Now I'm very interested in.
Yeah, it's like all of a sudden you're engaged. Your focus is really engaged, right?
And I like snorkeling, but you give me a spear gun, now we're hunting. And also,
I mean, the opportunity to learn fish behavior the thing that occurs to me about angling is even with your polarized glasses, right? You can only see so far into what's going on. When you're diving, suddenly you're like, oh, this is what fish do. This is what they're doing under here. You know what I mean?
You realize that how much you don't belong there because they look at you like,
no way, bro.
Especially out there, the fish are smart. I mean, I'm pretty sure that like the fish knew if they're good to eat because the ones that weren't good to eat would like come up and check me out, and like anything of consequence was like nope. You'd see their tails they shoot off.
Oh, that's hilarious to think about.
But you're out there hunting, and you see some cool stuff. Whether it's eels in the hole or shark working the reef edge, and you're like, this is neat. Same thing. You're in the food chain, and you're kind of you're working the reef line. And
my wife couldn't be less interested in angling. Every once in a while, like but if you put a spear gun in her hand and put her in a wetsuit, now she's really engaged with it. She really, really enjoys it. For her, it's just like, I just don't like the randomness of, and I'm always like, it's not random, you're targeting, But she's like, nah, for me, it's too random. Like, I see you guys catch stuff you didn't expect to. She's like, it's random. And all I see is glare, and we're just standing around or whatever. But she's like, when she's under there and she can see what's going on, that type of fishing really lights her up,
Immersed.
Yeah.
Literally,
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Wow, man, it's really interesting. It's making me want to fish again. I find that after the sort of my fishing season starts to wind down, I asked my wife Ivani recently, I said, baby, if I could only fish or only hunt, what do you think I'd pick? It was summertime. She's like, oh, hunting. I was like, no, fishing. And then it was like, got to be like September. I asked her again. She's like, fishing? I was like, no, hunting. It's just shifts over,
the red meters.
But now you got me thinking about fishing a lot. For people who are trying to figure out how to get going on fishing, I mean, what do you sort of say to somebody who's, we keep mentioning this barrier to entry. It's just, there's a lot to learn. Mm-hmm. How do you make it simple, or how do you think somebody gets started, really?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's not like it's not even, like hunter safety courses don't do a lot to get you hunting, except that you kind of at least get the framework a little bit, right? But there's not like a fishing safety course you go to. Right. So it's like, you don't even have that inroad where you might meet somebody at least and be like, hey man, like, can I come along with you?
Sure.
So.
Yeah, fishing, there's jump right in. I mean, if you're interested in fishing, obviously there's a wide range of people who had done as a kid and want to get back to it, or had never done it, or just like me, I moved to a new area. It's like, I got to figure out the waters here.
Right.
The first place I always start is go down into a local tackle shop and just talk to the person. They want you to be successful. You kind of establish some relationships, you get some pointers. If you think about, I need to start fishing here, it's kind of overwhelming. Like, there's trout in the rivers, and there's stripers, and there's tuna in this cod, and you kind of get like, I can do nothing. So pick something, pick one thing. And,
I'd agree with that.
Start with stripers, and you start, if you have a background in it, you start looking for areas of where they're going to hang out. When I moved here, I started driving up down the seacoast, and you're looking for, the deepest water or a point, or rocks. Good place to find something called the rockfish. And you start kind of building some areas called scouting. And then if you don't know what you're doing, is there's plenty of boats, both head boats or guides that will take you out, and they'll kind of get you like the basics. And we talked about doing that for ground fish. November fishing is most people's boats.
Talk about what a head boat is for people.
Yeah, so a head boat is think of a larger boat. You're paying by the head, so it's usually not as expensive as chartering a boat. So it's you're one of, could be 10, could be 100 people on this boat, and they take you out for the day. And now you have 100 people on board who might teach you something, and you can rent gear. They'll give you bait. So it's, if you just show up, you'll
and they also want you to be successful. They want you to have a good time. Yeah. So my experience with that has been fantastic. I fished that boat I was telling you, the Bunny Clark, out of a Gunkwit, and it's more for about 100 and I don't know what I pay, just over $100 a day probably, rather than if I got a chartered boat and it's $1,000 a day and I can get 6 people together. It's still cheaper for me to go on this boat, and what it would cost me to maintain an offshore boat, right? An offshore capable boat. I mean, it's a money pit, and I don't have enough time, and I live kind of far from the coast. It makes more sense for me to just pay $120
Absolutely.
a day and they fillet all my fish for me.
Right.
And all I got to focus on is catching, and they get you up to speed pretty quick. I mean, you know, you deal with line tangles, you got a lot of people
Right.
there and stuff like that. But I mean, what an awesome way to get started, especially if you want food. If you're straight up in it for the food, because I can leave that boat and just do the math. Like, okay, I spent $120 today on this, and I caught this much fish by weight, you know, and it's like, oh, that was a lot cheaper than going to the supermarket and buying
Right.
fish. Whereas if I try to go buy myself a 24-foot center console or something, now I'm not, you know, it's never a good
recoup your
deal for
costs.
those fillets, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, I'm still in the red from my last boat, I think.
I think, yeah, probably. But
Yeah, jump on a boat. I mean, said if you're on the ocean, if not, said there's guides that will take you out. Pacific Northwest, you know, there's plenty of guides on the
that's
rivers.
such a good value too. I mean, you pay. Sometimes the price seems a little steep when you're new to it, like what it costs to go out with a guide for the day. But that individual lesson that you can get,
Oh yeah,
especially if you get somebody who's maybe not yelling all the time, somebody who's got a
Yeah.
cool head,
Oh, yeah.
and who can really just talk to you about what you're looking for. Because that's one of the things about a head boat is they're not going to tell you exactly like. The boat's not there to tell you like what kind of structure you're over. What, you know, they're not going to be telling you their fishing secrets. They're
Right.
just putting you on top of the fish. But a guide can like, now you got that individual time to like learn a little bit. If they know that, hey man, I'm not going to come back to this spot you're showing me, but like I want to go look for spots. Like what am I looking for? What are you looking at? That kind of stuff,
yeah.
right? Like,
yeah, that's a good point. And it's, you said as an adult, you don't have enough time to maybe spend a decade making mistakes. You get, you know, it's a pretty steep learning curve with the guide.
yeah.
And you said you just start doing it. You got to get out there. I mean, pick a spot near you that you think is fishy, and you'll meet people out there fishing. And like, how many times you probably seen someone fishing in the same spot, and you kind of strike up a conversation, and all of a sudden is, you know, the guys give me a couple pointers, and you know, as long as you're respectful, not
A lot of times they're like, here, man, this is my secret weapon. Here, take one. They
Yeah.
give you a lure. They give you
just
something,
ask
you
them,
know.
like, I got to ask, what do you use? And you're killing me over
Yeah.
there. And it's like, yeah, here, take one.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
generally people want to.
People are usually really quite cool. There's that sense, like, it's funny because I'll have that feeling of like, oh, great, who's this asshole? You know, like I'm so bummed somebody else is there. But then you start talking to them, and you're like, oh yeah, we're obviously like-minded. You know, here we are both at the same spot doing the same thing. Like, this is somebody who I can talk to about this passion or whatever.
Oh yeah.
I would say to people like, if you go into a shop and you're new or you're talking to somebody, don't try to pretend like you know what you're, because it's just not going to get you what you're after. Like if you want to learn, just be like, I'm really new at this. Like, don't be like, no, I know what that is. Cause like, you're closing yourself off.
Yeah,
from,
that's a
like,
good
the
point.
opportunity. But I think too, like the gear can be pretty that was something that was overwhelming to me at first is I wanted the fishing rod that would do it all. You know,
Sure.
I wanted the one thing, and it's like, yeah, it doesn't work like that.
Right. I think you go back, you pick your one fishery. Hey, start at something
Yeah.
that's approachable for
agree
you
with
and
that.
where you're at. And from there, you'll start, you know, it's like anything, you start building out from that one building block.
Yeah.
But you got to start, you got to go, and generally go early. You know, most of my best fishing is done, you know, at dawn, and
Yeah.
and start grinding out, and you'll be surprised that all of a sudden you'll come home with dinner, and there's no better feeling.
Yeah. Fishing got me to learn how to get up early. I wasn't really good at that before. I didn't have a lot of incentive.
Yeah, I think it
before.
goes back to the incentive. Yeah, it goes off at, you know, in Hawaii I'm getting up at sometimes 2:30 because you want to be out in the grounds at sunrise, and I
Right.
pop out of bed.
Yeah.
Alarm goes off at 6:30 for work, and you know, somebody's like, ugh.
Yeah, exactly.
A
It's so
little slower.
interesting when you have that strong motivation,
Yeah.
though, right? Yeah, sometimes I'm not really even sleeping the night before, like you said, sort of rehearsing in my mind and picturing where I'm going to be and making sure I've got all my stuff, you know, sort of staged for the morning that I need and everything. What's it been like for you popping around so much? Because you're jumping into all these fisheries you described are awesome fisheries, but like they're dramatically different. Hawaii and Alaska's like really couldn't be more different, right?
Sure.
So how's it been for you to negotiate those different arenas?
Yeah, I mean, it's each one of those are different. As you talked about earlier, is you start kind of getting some trends in, you know, chasing stripers on the East Coast, throwing plugs is a lot like chasing, they call them papio or small giant trevally in Hawaii. You know, fish are they want places to feed and places to be safe and clean water. You start kind of finding they're all kind of behaving, you know, obviously, well, different species is kind of on the same things they need. But you go out, you look at some online forums and you read some books, you go in a tackle shop and you got, made a couple friends, and I made a good friend in Hawaii, Pat Murphy, and jumped on his boat, and we started fishing together. And if it was too rough for my little boat, he had a larger boat, we'd go, and now a lifelong buddy, just from kind of said, you find that group of people, and there's plenty of, I said, social media, online platforms, or just the guy at the tackle store, and you see them there, hey, how's it going? What are you going for stripers too? And you just said it kind of opens up some neat possibilities.
I always find find that spot where the tackle shop everybody thinks is the good one, and go to that one. You know what I mean? Because there's often a lot of junky ones too. Where you're not going to necessarily find the people who are really hardcore.
Right.
That can be really.
They want to be successful. Go tackle shop, spend a couple bucks, and be honest with them. I'm new to the area. Any pointers, and you kind of start.
That was neat to me what you said before, though, about like sort of being like, oh wait, will this technique from over here, or will this lure that I used in Alaska work here? Because I found like I have a little bit of not much. But I dabbled in climbing, both mountaineering and rock climbing and stuff, and years ago. And now when I climb a tree for a tree stand, like I use a rock climbing harness.
Really?
It's just, I mean, you fall facing the tree with your feet out onto the trunk of the tree. Now you look at the harnesses that they use for tree climbing, you're tethered from your back.
Interesting.
So then you end up hanging there, and then you got to take these things out of the pockets to do leg straps, because the way those harnesses work is they'll cut off your femoral artery and your nerve, right? So you start to damage your legs hanging there, hoping like a baby, just help me. Whereas with a rock climbing harness, you're facing the tree, so you can just climb back up. I mean, it's a better piece of equipment. It's just that these two worlds haven't found each other yet, And so sometimes when you've done something here and done something there, you realize like how you can merge worlds. It's something, I guess, sort of one of the last things I want to say to people listening is, if you're new to fishing, whatever you did before might be useful to you. Like, even though you didn't like have all this time to learn these things, you might have learned some stuff that's going to be really useful to you in this world. It might not be obvious at first, but it
crosses over. I mean, fish are predators, and if you can peel the one predator, it's going to peel the often them in a different ocean. Exactly. I see that up here I'm chasing yellowfin tuna in the northeast canyons. I'm chasing the same species in Hawaii, and two regionally way different ways of trolling. But like, I started using New England lures in Hawaii and vice versa, and they're both working. So regional things, techniques developed for a reason because they work, but
doesn't mean they're the only way.
There's not the only way. And the fish don't really care necessarily.
It's really cool. I saw somebody fishing the other day. It was a Chewbacca Lego figurine that they had affixed a hook to, and they're catching fish on it one after another. And you start realizing, like, okay, some of the stuff we do is a little like unnecessary. It's this, well, Lego Chewbacca catch fish, I believe, is the video name. Man, in conclusion, I've had you sitting here a while. I'm just curious if there's anything you want to communicate to the people listening today, or anything that we didn't cover that you were hoping would come up.
I mean, I think we talked about eating wild and the reasons for fishing, and also hunting, of health and cost. Sometimes cost both good and bad, and but I think getting out in the wild as an adult is, there's a fulfillment desire in all of us. And I felt that when I started hunting in my 30s. I didn't even pick up a rifle until I was 30. And you enter a world which we didn't create as humans, and you start seeing, the most beautiful sunrise, or two bear cubs playing on a river in Alaska, and it just gets you to places that we would never gone. I would have never tried that if I didn't want to fish. And if you have that desire, I think a lot of guys do, is go, get out there, start small, start local, and find people who are interested in that. But it's, there's that burning desire in all of us, and you get more fulfillment. For me personally, being in those environments, and I feel more alone in the city than I do 20 miles offshore. Right. You start building a network of friends who are doing that, and you talk about the food. Rather than buying that grass-fed beef, is that deer we'd ate, that was grass-fed, grass-finished, and and you feel that amalgam of emotions of remorse and pride when you shoot that, but you don't waste that meat, and you hang the hides in your living room, and you tell your daughter about you stalking it, and it just adds this complexity to or not complexity, kind of this element to your life that you never knew was there, and
right.
This deep immersive relationship with the environment. And I think people like yourself is you're trying to spread that word and kind of show adults that it's not too late. You can be 45 and still, get out to the wild, rewild yourself.
Exactly. I think there's going to be some people who heard what you just said and were like, oh, wait, you started hunting in your 30s? Like that's encouraging for a lot of people. So I want to say that first, and then also that you keep mentioning sort of getting into these places and these environments that we didn't create, and we're in this environment now, this built environment, which is so much the handiwork of people. And if you're a kid, let's say, who grew up in an urban environment and you had no inroad into the natural world, like your family doesn't do that, and you're not exposed to people or programs or anything where you get out into nature, there's something. Human beings were so flawed, so it's like what we create is also flawed. We create something amazing, but it also enslaves us. It's incredible technology, could be used to do so much, but we'll use it also in all these destructive ways. And there's just flaws in everything we've made. And so if that's all that's what your world is, just all the flawed handiwork of people, then you get out there and it's like, it's not just humbling, but it's relieving. Like, oh, well, thank goodness there's something so much bigger than me, because if there wasn't, life to me seems like so kind of pointless and drab. It's kind of a dark thing to imagine only living. Like, that's kind of what a prison would be like. You're just in a human built environment and all that's around you is things people have made. Like, you're being cut off from the bigger picture of what's out there. So I think when you say that, it resonates for me, because that's a big part. That's why I keep saying food's like a Trojan horse to that, because the food pieces we all have to eat, but really what we need more is, like, there's something we're missing that's a lot bigger than just food, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you're not feeding your body, you're also feeding your soul.
Yeah, exactly. Wow, man. Well, thanks for sitting down with us.
Thanks for having me. This was awesome.
Thanks for having us, man. Looking forward to checking out your book too. Hey, where do people find your lures again, and stuff on Instagram, anything like that?
Yeah, Instagram, it's at Sullivan Lures, and it's kind of lures on there I'm selling, and kind of make them custom. And then my last fishing trip, and I just made a fly box for my brother. I was just fly fishing out in the Pacific Northwest for Rory. So I got two younger brothers, and we're all always out there fishing, hunting together. And but yeah, you can find me both Facebook and Instagram. It's Sullivan Lures.
And the book's not out yet?
Book's not out yet. Fishing the Wild Waters. Nope. Looking for a publisher right now. And,
oh, cool.
But
so
hopefully
we'll keep people posted
on
that.
Get out there soon.
Yeah, awesome, man. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.